With tea plantations covering the equivalent of 220,000 sports pitches, it's hard to imagine Sri Lanka's landscape without them. Visit the main tea-growing regions, and tea plantations dominate the landscape. But without this man, some parts of Sri Lanka might look very different. In 1867, Scotsman James Taylor discovered that Sri Lanka had the perfect conditions for producing high-quality tea. His discovery saved the economy from the collapse of the coffee industry after it was devastated by disease, and shaped the country for years to come. The success of tea fueled development of the island's transport infrastructure. Many tea estates were owned by British planters until they were nationalised in 1971, following Sri Lanka's independence. After many tea estates made losses, the government allowed some estates to be part privatised in 1991. These estates became what are known as regional plantation companies. The estate workforce was, and still is, made up nearly entirely of people who left South India in the late 19th century to escape famine. Encouraged by government subsidies, a growing number of smallholders are now responsible for 73% of Ceylon tea production. At one time, Sri Lanka was the leading exporter of tea. However, in the last 20 years, it has been overtaken by India and Kenya. With Sri Lankan export values falling by nearly 30% between 2014 and 2016. Ceylon tea remains highly prized for its unique taste and quality, but it is no longer competitive. Sri Lanka tea pluckers are paid more than their counterparts in other countries, but pluck far fewer leaves. And yet, many still live in abject poverty. Over decades, the majority of tea sales have come from the Middle East and Russia, but war and falling oil prices have decimated demand. Despite a slump in global tea prices, Ceylon tea is now selling for record amounts at auction. But how long will buyers be prepared to pay these prices? What lies behind the low productivity? Climate change, political interference, labour relations, or social welfare? These are just some issues facing an industry that employs more than 1 million Sri Lankans. People whose lives are inextricably linked to the survival of the Ceylon tea industry. In this film, we explore the threats facing Sri Lanka's greatest global brand, Ceylon Tea. The industry is producing less and less tea, and the cost of producing that tea is getting higher. On average, Sri Lanka produces 330 million kilos annually, but this year the figure is set to drop to around 300 million. Fears grew when September saw output plunge to a 15-year low. Most people give one reason for this.
Production has been coming down about 10% this year because of the drought.
But is this an easy answer? In reality, are there more complex threats? And if ignored, could they destroy an industry that more than 1 million people depend on? Is recent bad weather part of a more worrying global problem?
The climate change is a very real threat. In the past 20 or 30 years, you could with some sort of a certainty forecast or predict the weather patterns. But today, we are not sure of what the weather tomorrow would be.
According to the research done on the climate change and its impact on Sri Lankan tea industry, we have seen that there's a serious threat to the low and mid-elevation tea plantation in Sri Lanka because of the high temperatures and the changes of the rainfall patterns.
In addition, all over the country, because of the variation in temperatures, rainfall pattern, and as well as the soil conditions, can change or can adversely affect the quality of the products as well.
But climate change is not the only threat to the quality of Ceylon tea.
The pollution of tea, that is mixing tea into, with the good quality you mix the bad quality teas, and you try to parcel that off as good quality.
The Minister has instructed industry regulator, the Sri Lanka Tea Board, to suspend any factory caught doing this. Few could argue that protecting Ceylon Tea's main selling point, its quality, is a bad thing, but other government interference has had a more damaging impact.
We used a very popularly and commonly used weedicide called glyphosate till about 2015. Then the government banned the import of glyphosate into Sri Lanka. Obviously that means we don't produce glyphosate. What happens is with the rains, the seed beds, billions of seed beds, is about 100 years old. There are millions and millions of seeds dormant in the soil, which is controlled by recommended application of weedicides. Now suddenly these things sprout and there's a profusion of weeds that impacts on the tea productivity. About 15 to 20% crop is lost because of presence of weeds. That is physically. Then the pluckers, it interferes with their plucking operation and it leads to other issues like it's inconvenient for them to pluck, and this is having a significant impact on the plantation operations. It decreases costs, so many other issues.
And if we can control or reduce the weedicide, so much the better. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that we are competing with other producing countries, the world market. And more than 95% of our teas are export purposes. So we have to balance, our marketing advantage or our competitiveness, and at the same time, grow tea in a sustainable manner. So we have not seen any, the evidence, solid evidence to say that the glyphosate is, the highly toxic.
The question is whether the government realises the harm their ban is having on Sri Lanka's second biggest export earner. But what other political interventions threaten to destroy Sri Lanka's greatest export? In Sri Lanka's 2016 budget, the government announced plans to restrict the size of estates run by regional plantation companies to 5,000 acres. With these estates currently averaging 25,000 acres, this will have a dramatic impact on organisations that claim to be already making losses. The question is how reducing economies of scale of production would benefit the tea industry.
So by splitting up the divisions into 5, you can have a more accountable system. If you have smaller clusters, it will be easier to manage. They've had the land for the last 20 odd years. Why should they be managing the companies if they can't make money? They can't be expecting the government to be giving them handouts when the bad times are there. They have to inbuild that into their economic model.
With higher rates of productivity, smallholders are often held up as an example, despite some exporters questioning the quality of some of the tea that they produce. However, is government subsidy to smallholders unfair?
Yeah, they get more. They got more from the government. Clear the jungle, they give subsidy. To plant the tea, they give plants. And they give manure subsidy. So they get everything.
Tea, it seems, is undoubtedly political. But government intervention is not the only political force that poses a threat. Some argue union influence is not always in the industry's best interests.
The politics has always been a disturbing element. When the planters and the trade unions don't come to some agreement, there is always unseen hand of government coercing and imposing, indirectly even some mandatory wage increases. Union, unlike any other industry, union is not separate from a political party. So there is a political agenda that drives these movements. So politicians exist because of the voters, and always they'll try to put the interests of the voters in front rather than the interests of the industry.
In October, trade unions helped agree a 50 rupee rise to workers' basic wage, plus a bonus for reaching a 22 kilo target. But how are unions viewed by the people they represent?
அப்படி எதுவுமே இல்லை. அவங்களுக்கு ஏதாவது வேணும்னா மட்டும் ஃபேக்ட்ரிக்கு வருவாங்க, எங்களை தேடி வருவாங்க வீட்டுக்கு. மற்றபடி நாங்கள் எது சொன்னாலும் கூட கண்டுக்க மாட்டோம். ஆனால் மாதம் மாதம் நாங்கள் எங்களுக்கு சம்பளத்தில் 150 ரூபா அவங்களுக்கு தான் கொடுக்குறோம் நாங்கள்.
In response, Mr. Sivalingam, MP and CWC party leader, claimed the worker was being used as propaganda by anti-union NGOs. The recent increase in wages was eventually agreed after years of negotiation and a wave of estate worker protests, instigated by unions. But many workers remain bitterly disappointed at union failure to agree a higher daily wage, such as the 1,000 rupees originally suggested by unions. Is this disappointment creating distrust between workers, unions and estate management and damaging productivity? Many planters feel tea estate workers get a fair deal and point out that they earn above the average for rural Sri Lankans. However, tea plucker wages vary considerably depending on the season and how many leaves there are to pluck. Now we will look behind the protests to see the reality of a tea estate worker's life. It may look as though there's plenty of tea leaves for the tea workers to pick, but it's only these new leaves which are good enough quality to count at auction. Each day it is expected that the tea workers pluck at least 18 kilos of tea, which is equivalent to roughly the size of this basket, which is heavier than you think. According to a union boss, workers face increasing challenges in plucking tea because of weeds, leeches and bees. Here one woman shows us scars from leeches. Ceylon Tea is renowned for its superior quality, but with the majority of it shipped abroad, few Sri Lankans can actually afford to drink it. The question is, how many of those people enjoying their cup of Ceylon tea in countries abroad actually stop to think about the plight of Sri Lankan tea workers? Indra Devi lives on the state-run St. Coombs plantation with her husband, mother and 3 young children. Despite a government policy to give estate workers their own plot of land, the stark reality is many still live in homes that barely provide shelter.
நாங்களும் கேட்டு கேட்டு எங்களுக்கும் என்னன்னு போயிடுச்சு. அதனால இடம் எதுவுமே இல்லாதனால, ஒரு வீடு கட்டுற வசதி எதுவுமே இல்லாதனால நாங்கள் இப்படி இருக்கிறோம். மழையிலையும் வெயிலையும் இருக்கிற நேரம் ரொம்ப கஷ்டமாக இருக்கும். தண்ணி வரும், ஒழுகும், பிள்ளைகள்லாம் வச்சுருக்க சரியான கஷ்டப்படுவோம். ரொம்ப கஷ்டத்தில் தான் இருக்கிறோம்.
The tea industry is facing a labour crisis. Although some aspects of tea pluckers' lives may have improved, there are still considerable concerns about the social problems they face.
I visited a state plantation community, and it was saddening to witness the stagnation in cycles of poverty in extremely harsh living conditions, with little access to services including sanitation, health and education. Alcoholism, child labour, violence and sexual abuse are reportedly common, and a significant proportion of the school-age children drop out or do not go to school.
The isolation of many estates from nearby towns cannot be underestimated. With improved education over the last few years, many workers are looking to a better future for their children, away from the estates.
இல்லை அப்படி நினைக்கவே இல்லை. பிள்ளைகள்லாம் நல்லா படித்து எங்களுக்கு நாங்கள் தான் அப்படி வேலை செய்கிறோன்னு இருக்கக்கூடாது. எங்கள் பிள்ளைகள் நல்ல ஒரு ஜாப்பில் தேடி நல்ல ஒரு இதாக வாழ்க்கையை இது பண்ணணும்.
As a result, many plantation owners now face an urgent shortfall of workers and a growing number of retired workers living on the estate. Undeniably, the living conditions vary hugely. While this is sometimes because family members send money from outside the state, it also seems some plantation companies take better care of their workforce. But is there another reason why some tea workers live better than others?
Consumption of liquor is very high in the plantation area. A man who consumes liquor, more liquor, will not do anything. That family will suffer. One family will be okay, the next family will be suffering.
When the output is affected, it affects their earning and their quality of life. High alcoholism leads to household domestic violence, and most of the time the victims of such domestic abuse is the women.
அப்போ இந்த மதுனால நிறைய வீட்டுகளுக்கு பிரச்சனை தான். பிள்ளைங்களை படிக்க விட மாட்டாங்க. அப்பா அம்மா இருக்க தான் விசேஷமாக குடிச்சிட்டு வந்தால் அந்த பிள்ளைகளை படிக்க விடாமல் சத்தங்கத்தம் போடுவாங்க. அப்போ அப்படியெல்லாம் பிரச்சனைகள். அப்போ இந்த பாலியல் துஷ்பிரயோகமாக அந்த மாதிரி விஷயங்கள்லாம் அந்த மதுப்பாவனையில் நடக்குது அப்படிங்கிறது அவங்களுக்கு ஒரு தெளிவான விளக்கம் போய் சேர்ந்துச்சுன்னு சொன்னால் அவங்க அதை கைவிடுவாங்க அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு நம்பிக்கை இருக்குது.
பிள்ளைங்களுக்கு பிரச்சனை, அதுங்களுக்கு சாப்பாடு ஒழுங்காக கொடுக்கறதுக்கு இல்லை, உடுப்பு கஷ்டம், அந்த மாதிரி ஒரு இது இப்போ இந்த மதுபானம்லாம் இருக்குது. அது படிப்பு பிரச்சனை ரொம்பவே இருக்குது.
But why are so many estate workers driven to drink? The Planters Association say there are already some programs to tackle alcohol abuse on estates. But can more be done? Studies have shown that a happy workforce is more productive. If the tea industry is to have a future, the health and well-being of workers must be taken seriously, because without them, there is no tea and no industry. But is there hope for an industry many believe to be in decline? A perfect storm of challenges threatens Sri Lanka's second biggest export earner. With Ceylon Tea about to celebrate its 150th year, can the industry secure its future? Because if action is not taken, it could disappear like the coffee industry before it. 75% of Sri Lanka's tea growing regions are at risk from climate change. But if planters adopt recommendations and plant newly developed seeds, there is hope tea planters can continue their long history of adapting to a diverse climate.
We have been working on this climate change and how to mitigate the climate change. One of the ways doing that is the development of new varieties resistant to the drought and high temperatures, which we have been successful, and we are hoping to release that new set of cultivars in 2017.
But even if tea plants thrive in new conditions, Ceylon Tea will still struggle to be competitive. Demand for tea bags is increasing, yet only 10% of Ceylon Tea production targets this market. The Minister of Plantations insisted that the industry should continue to focus on premium orthodox tea.
We can't be destroying what we have to go into a new form of manufacture. So I feel the best form is to retain what we have now, protect it, and then to build on that.
However, the minister was not against change.
I feel Sri Lanka has to be more innovative in their product.
While it is unlikely that Sri Lanka will beat India and Kenya on cost of production, are there other opportunities for growth? The minister responded to a hotly debated topic among exporters, whether to import cheaper tea to blend with Ceylon tea.
Have some blending here, but also to protect our traditional industry is also very important. We see a trend towards organic tea and also flavored tea and herbal teas also. So we will make policy decisions accordingly on how to expand on those markets. So we are looking at new markets, particularly Iran, the US and China.
High wages and low output are often cited as the main threats to the industry's sustainability. The minister described the recent wage agreement with a partial link to productivity as a breakthrough, and like many others, said the model needed to be built on.
We have a very regimented system, so all that is not necessary. We want to make them workers, sort of a social business entrepreneur, instead of being a hired worker who is supervised, who is monitors, who is checked. So worker will pluck the field assigned to him or her, then we will take over the leaf and they will convert into black tea, like what is done in the smallholder sector so successfully.
But will attempts to emulate the smallholder sector be successful without government subsidies to incentivise? When questioned on whether it is unfair that smallholders receive subsidies, the minister said he wanted to reintroduce planter fertiliser subsidy. It looks as though the government may also want to rectify damage caused by the weedicide ban.
We can't allow the industry to be affected by policy decisions that are not properly studied. So I have told the relevant leaders that this glyphosate ban has to be given, the tea industry has to be given exemption for it.
Away from the fields, older machinery and some of the tea factories may be fit for purpose, but often the worker housing isn't. However, the minister has announced plans that could transform the living conditions of many.
40,000 houses will be built through the Indian assistance of the Indian government. And that's going to be a real social change.
Other small but welcome innovations are taking place, as awareness of worker well-being and a need to retain the industry's workforce grows. like this tea leaf basket, which helps protect tea pluckers' necks. Surely, there is other technology to improve the tea production process. Tea is still the most popular beverage after water. But if new generations are to enjoy Ceylon tea, the industry cannot afford to stand still. It must innovate and respond to changing consumer patterns. It must invest in new technology and continue to improve the lives of workers. The industry must come together and find a way to make it work for everyone. The plantation owners, the smallholders, the consumers, and the workers.